damn well better stay away from psychedelics. No, I don't think everybody should do it. I think revolutions are made by 15% of a population, and that you can have a psychedelic society and be a citizen of a psychedelic society and never take psychedelics. But the ambiance of the society will be psychedelic. I think that you should, it's a calling. And in shamanism is a calling. And if you're not up for it, my own biography is perhaps instructive in this. I mean, the reason I'm into all this is because I'm into what's weird. I always have been. I mean, I've always loved the bizarre, the outre, the stuff of the edge. And, when I got to psychedelics, I thought I'd hit the main vein of sprung verse or something. I mean, if that's what you like, then this is your answer. You see, what the psychedelic is going to do is it's going to destroy your whole world, your whole conception of your world. And some people, that's tremendously liberating. They say, wonderful, at last I'm free of it. Other people say, my God, now I'm hopelessly mad. I have nothing left to cling to. I've really done it this time. And so that's almost an aesthetic judgment, whether you like watching your world shredded before your eyes and made into nonsense. If that makes you feel liberated and secure, then you can sign up for this carnival. If that alarms you, I think best to stick to the tried and true. It's not for people of weak psychic constitution. And what shamanism is about is, I mean, I know someone who says of the mushrooms, my goal with taking mushrooms is always to be able to stand more. And they don't mean higher doses. They mean more of what it reveals. And I feel like that. I mean, the mushroom speaks. I didn't really stress this in my talk, but the strange, the confounding fact about these mushrooms is that they speak to you in plain English. And this is completely unexpected. How can such a thing be? I mean, one is dumbfounded in the presence of this. And yet, by being able to have an I-thou relationship to this thing, you open up yourself to what is essentially a magical dimension, a dimension of allyship with this thing. I come to this completely as a rationalist. I mean, I am more scientist, more rationalist than anything else. I am very uncomfortable with my position in the New Age. I hate all that stuff. The quartz crystal suppositories and the channeling of dead Egyptians and all this horrible stuff which goes on. I mean, it's just an affront to the thinking mind. But when I encountered these psychedelics, I said, my God, skepticism is the proper path. And I believe this. It's not to believe, it's to test. I said to the mushroom once, why us? Meaning my brother and me. Why us? And it said, because you don't believe in anything. You're not a believer. And so it's a real thing. It's a real mystery. It will not yield to reason. It's a tremendously well-kept secret. I mean, how can it be? For instance, take the case of dimethyltryptamine, DMT. This is the most powerful psychedelic in existence. It only lasts 2 or 3 minutes. This most powerful of all psychedelics, we naturally elaborate in our own brains. This is a curious fact. It means that psychedelics, to be what we call powerful or overwhelming, are not chemically alien or exotic to the brain, but they are rather very familiar and very much like things already present in the brain. And when you smoke DMT, the entire world is replaced in about 30 seconds with something completely impossible to anticipate and utterly astonishing. Utterly astonishing. I mean, the character of the experience is almost that of pure astonishment. I mean, people have said to me, can you die from smoking DMT? Well, the truthful answer is yes, by astonishment. Death by astonishment is a real problem here. And, well, how many of us? This is the rarest of all emotions. I mean, when was the last time you were astounded, struck speechless with amazement? We have these phrases in our language, struck speechless with amazement. But if it happens once or twice in your life, I dare say you'll remember it till they lower the box. Well, DMT delivers this on demand. Well, what is so astonishing about it? Nothing less than breaking into an inhabited elf nest of self-transforming machine creatures who are squealing and squeaking in a visible glossolalia that falls like rain on the interior landscape. There isn't even ordinary space and time. This occurs 30 seconds after availing yourself of this compound, and you are restored to normalcy 8 minutes later. It means these things are not far away. It is not destructive. It is not inimical to the organism. It simply is suppressed by culture. We don't understand how enclosed we are by the prisons of a limited and scientific language. True weirdness is raging just outside the confines of the cultural paradigm, which is trying to reassure us, oh, it's all very humdrum and all runs down into entropy and I shouldn't worry about it if I were you. This is not, in fact, the case. However, I digress. Yes. By the New Age? Well, I hope I didn't come off as terribly hostile. I'm sort of lightheartedly critical is what we're shooting for here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the question was, given my view of the New Age, what do I make of the appropriation of it of shamanism by the New Age and its marketing? Well, if it's non-psychedelic, I absolutely deplore it. I mean, I'm not here to name names, but I'll assure you the major marketers of non-psychedelic shamanism were turned on to the power of shamanism by their experiences with psychedelics. And I take a very hardcore position on this just to infuriate people. I really don't believe there's any other way you can get there. I mean, these yogic states and states induced by starvation, flagellation, celibacy, all these tremendously pleasant methods, are not to be compared to the psychedelic state. I don't know what those people are talking about. One of the things that concerns me is people say, well, this is a spiritual path and you're a spiritual teacher and so forth and so on. No, I am not a spiritual teacher. Anyone familiar with my moral behavior can assure you of that. I don't know whether this has anything whatsoever to do with the spiritual quest as ordinarily conceived. My approach to it is it's a phenomenon of some sort that confounds our notion of reality. the thing which got me started on my travels and my career writing about all this was I had been very keen on Carl Jung and all that business and had been raised Catholic. And so when I smoked DMT, I had the expectation that the most far-out thing that would happen, that could indeed happen, would be a kind of revelation of the Jungian archetype. The great round dance of the archetypes would be made visible. Well, what was completely dumbfounding was there's no relationship to the DMT flash, to the art history of the species. Our art doesn't hint of these dimensions very aptly, and yet this is available to all of us. It's so suppressed that it's not even in the human unconscious. It's been suppressed below the level of the human unconscious. It's as though it's a lost world, a parallel continuum. And if you have access to this lost world, this parallel continuum, it would never enter your mind to invent mathematics, government, religion, all of these things, because you are in the moment. You are at peace with yourself and your community. And this is something that we have to make our way back to, because the disequilibrium of history has turned rather rough and ugly here post-World War II. Yeah. Thank you for taking your turn. You're next. Vitamin K, let me just say, I say this because there's something I want to say. The word drug has been tremendously misappropriated and corrupted by the movers and shakers of society. I mean, we all, I believe it's safe to say, are repelled by obsessive, self-destructive, unexamined behavior. And that's what is laid at the feet of drugs. However, chasing dollars or pounds, worrying about making a fashion statement, owning a Ferrari, all of these things are obsessive, self-destructive habits. So I have a rule, a three-step test if you're thinking of availing yourself of a substance as part of your program of self-growth and advancement. The first question you should ask yourself is it, how can I afford it? Yes, well, that's 0. Moving on to 1. Question 1 is, does it occur in nature? And question 2 is, does it have a history of shamanic usage? You see, if it has a history of shamanic usage, then issues like, does it cause tumors, miscarriages, blindness, palsy, this has all been answered. We have our human data. We have 5,000 years of use by the Mazatecan Indians or somebody else. We have our human data sample. Then the third test is, does it occur naturally, or do its near relatives occur naturally in the human brain? Because we don't want to insult the human brain. We don't want to toxify it. We don't want to poison it. Well, the happy conclusion of applying these rules is that the most terrifyingly powerful of the psychedelics pass all tests with flying colors, DMT being the perfect example. I mean, DMT is a megatonnage hallucinogen. It occurs naturally in the metabolism of every single one of us. At this moment, if you were an American audience, I would tell you you're holding a Schedule I drug and are subject to immediate arrest and trial. Every human being on earth falls into this category. This is the catch-22 that they hold in reserve if they ever have to come after us. You are holding and you can't stop yourself. the fact that DMT, that we return to a normal state in only a few minutes from DMT, argues that the non-invasive quality is very important. If you take a drug and feel wobbly 48 or 72 hours later, or are having body aches or blurred vision or something like that, this is a drug to stay away from. This is not something you want to get mixed up in. You judge the non-toxicity of a drug by how fast your body is able to return you to normal. And K, which inspired the question, which is ketamine, doesn't pass any of these tests. And I did it, and I found the state very interesting. But when I saw the data on how it depressed the immune system, and there's some concern that it may trigger epileptic kindling, I didn't think it was a good idea. Also, the fact that you have to bang it, that's a bad habit. I don't think we should get into that, because then it's a vector for disease and just pushes all kinds of the wrong buttons. Yes?
Where I live, Liberty comes from my research. I'd like to know different, I'd like to know the effects.
You mean as opposed? The difference will not be great except in the dose ratio. I think Liberty caps are per unit gram stronger than Stropharia cubensis, but still, don't you have to eat a dozen or two of them? 300. Aha. Okay. Well, and good for you. Stropharia cubensis, I mean, in culture, we've grown 170-gram specimens, which when dried down, go down to 15 grams. Well, what I always say is a dose is 5 dried grams. And I might, since we're on this subject, say something about technique, because I always forget this. It seems so obvious to me, but it's a revelation to some people. The way you do these things is you do them on an empty stomach in silent darkness. Obviously. I mean, you're looking for hallucinations, right? This is a hallucination hunt. It's a vision quest. So people ask the most bizarre questions. Example, will I be able to drive? Now, there's the male dominator ego for you. In no sense of the word will you be able to drive. That's what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to drive. So just, put that in your pipe and smoke it early on and give up the notion of driving. No, you should be in silent darkness. And some people resist the silent part. And they say, well, but, I always listen to the mothers of invention on my trip. Well, give it a rest, friend. It's perfect. They're wonderful on the natch. So let the Pythagorean inner music issue from your soul in silent darkness. Then you will be amazed. I mean, if it bores you, flip on the top of the pops. But give it a half an hour before you resort to that. Yeah.
Can I just ask you if you've had any experience of the book by the tone, which we're told is platforms and will give us known tones to lick it?
Yes, well, I see that The Guardian dutifully reported all one would need to know to get seriously involved in toad abuse. In America, we hear about toad licking, and it's always advanced as a folk way of the primitive Australians. And we in America have gone them one better. First of all, we don't hurt our toads. We drive out into the desert in our four-wheel drive vehicles, and we gently milk our toads onto the what we call a windshield, a windscreen. And then it dries in the sun, and we get out our little frost scrapers, and scrape this better left undescribed material off the windshield, and then this is smokable. This is 5-methoxy-DMT from Bufo alvaris, and it passes all the tests. Well, not the test, does it occur in a plant? No, it occurs in an animal. That's better. It's interesting. It's one of the few animal-based hallucinogens. We call it toad foam, as opposed to more inelegant appellations that have been used. And it's sort of like, it's 5-methoxy-DMT, so it's a variety of dimethyltryptamine. But compared to DMT, it's sort of like AM radio versus 70-millimeter cinemascope. There's what I heard a researcher describe last week as there's an effulgent emotion. Yes, there certainly is. There's no word for this emotion, but it's very large. But there is very little visual activity, kind of after-image-like stuff. But on DMT, the hallucinations have an existential veracity that's absolutely jaw-dropping. I mean, they are three-dimensional, they are highly colored, they are in motion. These elf-like creatures that one encounters in the DMT space are, I've described them as self-transforming basketballs. They are like jeweled basketballs, and they come toward you, and then they recede, and they're singing in these silvery voices which make objects. They have a language which is visibly beheld, a favorite theme of mine that we didn't get to tonight. They make a language which they then present to you, the objectified language, and it looks rather like Fabergé eggs or the sorts of toys that alien astronauts might give their children to amuse them. I mean, when you are shown by one of these, I call them tykes, these creatures in the DMT state, when one of these tykes comes bounding toward you and offers one of these mechanized syntactical Fabergé machines, you look at it with the perfect knowledge that if you could bring this thing across to this world, no stone would be left upon another. That there is something about it that is confounding. It is literally impossible, and yet you're looking at it. It's in front of you. I mean, the impossible is happening, and this is a result of that. Yes, back here, patient. Datura. The question is about Datura. This is I would think of it as a kind of deliriant, actually. The chemical family involved is tropanes. We don't want to get too technical here, but a good rule is when I talk about psychedelics, I'm talking about indole alkaloids, LSD, psilocybin, ibogaine, the so-called cyclicized tryptamines. I'm pretty narrow-minded about all this. Even mescaline doesn't quite make it because it's an amphetamine. Datura, the morphogenetic field that is associated with Datura is one of magic working, of the spreading of delusions, or of the it's often used in contexts where somebody is working their sexual will with somebody else who may not be into it. I remember what put me off Datura was years ago I lived in Nepal, and a friend of mine, actually an Englishman, I met him one day in the market, and we were just making the small talk there, and it came to my attention from talking to this person that he thought I had paid him a visit in his apartment. He was under the impression that we were sitting in his apartment having this discussion, when in fact we were moving around in an Asian souk. So I thought, this is a level of disconnection from reality that we don't need. The thing that's interesting about the indole hallucinogens, and especially about DMT, is you never lose, there's a core portion of your being that is never lost hold of, that is always observing. And I remember on ketamine, one of the things that put me off about it was, this is such a reality obliterating compound that in every trip you come to this moment in which you realize with the force of a revelation, I'm stoned. That's what's happening. Now I remember I'm a human being. I'm on a trip. This is a trip. I'm on a trip. And then it all falls into place. Well, what this is telling you is it's nearly over. And that you were so cut off from being able to understand that what was going on that you could never remember that there had ever been anything preceding it. You could never anticipate that anything would ever follow upon it. You completely accept this impossible situation. So I don't like that. I like holding on to this observing eye. Now, this may be my own ego clinging to the last grain of ego. But nevertheless, I think that's it's very important that there be a clarity of something throughout the experience, and Datura seems to erode that fairly seriously. Well, I'm getting the high sign. Oh, one more question. One more.
You've bandied chemical words about quite freely here. Two more questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were permitting a question. You're asking a question.
Chemical terms around.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Many people feel that marijuana is a liberating agent. Is marijuana the poor cousin of the hallucinogenics that you're mentioning?
Well, I don't know if poor cousin is the word. Marijuana is the exception to all the rules. Marijuana is a polyhydric alcohol. I can't say enough in praise of marijuana. I mean, the lifeblood of my inspiration. Yes, it's interesting. Sometimes I teach a whole weekend, and this never comes up. I mean, we're all so well behaved. Here we are discussing these outlandish drugs when, the fact of the matter is cannabis is our daily bread. And yes, I mean, this is this notion that community comes first, that there is a family, there is a tribe. I mean, what people say, I observed this very closely because I got into therapy, strangely enough, with a therapist who I thought was quite brilliant, except she knew nothing about drugs, which was a preposterous situation for me to be in. And so she said, well, now, this cannabis business, how many times a day do you do it? I said, oh, by the dozen. I said, well, and how many years have you been doing this? I said, 25. I said, well, surely this is... and it kept coming up. So finally I said, I'll quit. I'll quit so that you see that nothing happens, so that you won't be running around the countryside laying this trip on your patients, because nothing will happen. Well, and then, so then I did quit for 2 months. And what I noticed was a tremendous narrowing of my consciousness to the point where before it was over, I was staying up late nights working on balancing my checkbook and studying receipts and plotting how to chisel on the tax man with my receipts, and just the most horrible, mundane consciousness. Well, then, you take a puff of cannabis and you think about Moliere's dentures and the causes of the fall of the Trebizondian Empire, and the really important stuff of life, you see, rather than your own stupid ego trip. Back here, I promised, and then we're out of here. Ecstasy. Well, I don't want to insult the local choice. I assume you mean MDMA. Too bad. I'd rather answer the general question. I think ecstasy is wonderful. MDMA is problematic. Every drug, some of the most bizarre drugs, like cocaine, for example, every drug, when it makes its debut in the marketplace, LSD, cannabis, is hailed as a love drug. And so it was with MDMA. My personal experience was that it was never as good as the first time, which seemed to me a bad thing. That you want to learn, you want to work with these things, you want to be able to take them somewhere. So, and what I observed in America was people just took it to party. Well, it's too little is known about it to do that. There is considerable, irrefutable evidence that it makes very long-term changes on the dendritic processes of the nerve. My brother is a research pharmacologist. He did much of that work in Stephen Perutka's lab at Stanford. So as far as what ecstasy does, the subjective effects on the subject, it's fine. I'm all for that. But it doesn't have the clean bill of health that it would have if we could get it out of a plant and point to a culture that had used it for 5,000 years and could point to compounds in the brain that it closely mimics. This is where, this is the division. This is what I stand for. I stand for the plants. The plants have souls. They carry the morphogenetic field of thousands of years. When you take psilocybin, it takes you. You are participating in all the trips that it ever induced in anyone. And this is a tremendously stable field of experiences. When you take a drug fresh out of the laboratory, it has no soul, it has no story, it has no direction. It's a product of the demon artifice of man. And I prefer to put my hand in the large hand of the goddess and make my way into this dimension under the aegis of the sanctioned vegetables that for millennia have always been there to fling open the doorways to vistas of pleasure and delight that would make you turn up your nose at the best Beverly Hills has to offer. Believe me, the inner riches are incomparable. And this is how we recover our dignity, by not being whores to mammon and pursuing all of this trash that they're peddling to us, and insist instead on the maximizing of human values, human emotion, and human community. No, Myristicin is a fairly distantly removed precursor. You're screwing up my avalanche to conclusion here.
Could you please say something about what has been referred to as the Mckenna scenario, any thoughts and only your points
Well, we've arrived rather late at that subject, haven't we? Yes, well, I'll just give you I'm the purveyor of a bizarre notion which was told to me by an elf troupe. It's a formal mathematical notion that argues very strongly, and had we a second evening to get together, I would never repeat myself. We would talk about something entirely different. I think that we're headed toward a planetary transformation within our lifetimes. Specifically around 2012 AD. And this is not a political transformation or a biological transformation. It's an actual transformation of the laws of physics themselves, that the presence of creatures such as ourselves on this planet is an indication of the nearness of what I call the transcendental object at the end of time. And it is like an attractor. It is like an energy pocket in the epigenetic landscape into which we have fallen. And that the fury of 20th century culture is indicative of our nearness to this globally transformative moment that will emerge out of ourselves. Essentially, we are going to shed the monkey, the linguistic creature that is symbiotic with these monkeys is about to disentangle itself from physis and realize some kind of angelic transformation, very difficult for us to anticipate or understand. If I had more time, I would say more, much more, but that's all, folks. Thank you very much. I just want to say that to make these ideas real we have to overcome the very format that we objectify tonight. Any one of you could have sat here and done this. This rap means nothing if it isn't a democratically available mystery. No hierarchy, no special knowledge, no specific racial background, no degree is necessary. This belongs to all of us, and I want to wish you well with your community building and with the vision that is coming to fruition here. Very important, very empowering for the rest of us in other parts of the world. Keep up the good work. I hope you invite me back. Thank you very much.